Well, good afternoon, Grace Baptist Church, as we continue our walk through the Passion Week, the final week of the most important person who ever lived, Jesus Christ the righteous. We come now to Monday. And on Monday, Jesus heads back into the city of Jerusalem, and one of the major events that happen on this day is the second cleansing of the temple. We're going to look at Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 11, and want to read verses 15 through 18. And they came to Jerusalem. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. Jesus cleanses the temple, and we're not necessarily told the reason why, but I do believe that there is a key for us in the text. Yes, it is no doubt that perhaps one of the issues was that things are being sold in the temple. And of course, any house of merchandise, or Jesus used the term den of robbers, that comes from Jeremiah. And it's quite likely that these pilgrims who came from all parts of the Roman Empire had to exchange their money to pay the temple tax, and they also needed some animals to sacrifice, which they would have not brought with them all the way from the places that they journeyed from. And so it's likely that there was some measure of bad deals going on, that inflated prices, all those kinds of things. But I think one of the main reasons why Jesus had an issue with this is where this was happening. Jesus says that his house, the temple, is to be the house of his Father, the house where worship of his Father is to take place from, is to be a house of prayer. And there's also a key in the text from which that comes. In Isaiah chapter 56, the quote is from verse 7, but note if you would verse 6. "And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants. Everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it, and holds fast my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples." First of all, the temple was to be a house of prayer, a place where access to God could be gained, where God the Father would hear the cries of his people and accept the worship of his people. Can you imagine gathering, well, when we can gather again, in the auditorium at Grace Baptist, and there being a market in the middle of this service, even if that market was out in the foyer, not directly in the auditorium? The activity of buying and selling taking place and drowning out the noises of worship. God's house was to be a house of prayer. And so Jesus, who modeled for us all throughout the Gospels, his close connection with his Father shown through his prayers. Not only the types of prayers that he prayed, but the frequency with which he prayed them. But I think there's another key element here. His house was to be, or the house of his Father, house dedicated to worship of his Father, was to be a house of prayer. But where is this set up? Up on the Temple Mount, there was what was known as the Court of the Gentiles. And it was most of the outer area of that top courtyard before you entered into the Court of the Women and then into the temple complex proper. So where is this market set up? Where is this trading taking place? It's taking place in the Court of the Gentiles. This is a way that the Jews of the time were basically saying, Gentiles need not be here. In a place dedicated, the only place anywhere close to the temple, up on the Temple Mount, dedicated to foreigners, dedicated to those that were non-Jewish, is now completely overrun with a market. And so what does Jesus do on the Monday before his Friday crucifixion? He goes back to the temple yet again. He had previously done this, as recorded in the Gospel of John. And he cleans out this practice and says, no, my Father's house is first of all to be a house of prayer, but it is a house of prayer for all nations. Aren't we glad on this Monday of Passion Week that the sacrifice of Jesus Christ does not only apply just to Jewish people, but it applies to all who believe, no matter what nation they're a part of. That God is a God for all people, no matter what, again, your ethnicity, the language you speak, your family background. The gospel is open to all. Thanks be to God.